Welcome back to my channel. My name is Dr. Anwar Youssef Dunbar, and this is Big Discussions 76, Science and Technology. Well, I have created and uploaded a lot of content here on Big Discussions 76, Science and Technology regarding the coronavirus slash COVID-19 pandemic, starting back in February when I launched this channel. And later tonight, I'm planning to have a discussion, a panel, a live stream with another scientist who's been on this channel before, Nicole Ali. And we're going to talk about what we know about the coronavirus. So we're planning to have just like a little discussion, and then open it up to different people who want to come on and talk and ask questions, and just, as I say, toss the ball around back and forth. And so I think my major contribution will be in my areas of expertise, which are pharmacology and toxicology, and I've been very outspoken about that in my content and in the discussions I've been in regarding this topic. But I also I currently work in regulatory affairs, and I've been very outspoken about that as well. And there's a blog post that I wrote a while ago that I flashed in a lot of my content, so people can read about regulatory affairs if they want to. That's a science career, and that's a science sector all in itself, in addition to research and development and academia. And a lot of people don't know that regulatory affairs is out there, but that's very much a part of this coronavirus story. And so this video is kind of for me as a way to for our discussion later on. There's some information that I want to pull together. I think that there's information that Nicole's going to pull together that we're going to talk about and present. And I wanted to just kind of brush up what I know about vaccines. And there's a whole regulatory process to approving vaccines once they've been researched, and once it's been determined that yes, we have something that we think can protect us against this particular contagion, which in this instance it's the coronavirus. So I just wanted to just shoot a video. I found some things about vaccines and the immune system, and how vaccines are registered and regulated and approved for use by the general population. And I just wanted to capture some of those points in a video here. And once again, in something that's been coming up in discussions recently with Nicole and BGS and just in general, and I uploaded a video about this last week on my channel, in terms of one of the keys to science. One of the major keys to science is reading and figuring and investigating what you don't know, and figuring out what's already known, and coming up with your own ideas. And in some instances, if you're in a research setting in academia, not wasting time reinventing the wheel. That was a hard lesson I had to learn during my doctoral studies. But in any case, so for context, I found an article about how it's entitled "How Long Will a Vaccine Really Take?" And this was written by Stuart A. Thompson, and this is back in April of 2020. So this is dated April 30th, 2020. But just for context, as I was getting my points together for my discussion on my my live stream discussion later on, what I did was I compiled what I know and what I've researched about the drugs and the potential treatments for COVID-19. And what I realized is that all the drugs, whether it's chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, remdesivir, aviftadil, dexamethasone, these are all treatments for individuals once they've been infected with the virus. So this is kind of after the fact. These are strategies for after the fact. But a vaccination, the power of a vaccine is that it will prime the body and boost the body's protection mechanisms to prevent infection. So one strategy is to prevent infection. The other strategy is to treat infection. And that's why this whole vaccination discussion is significant. And as you know, if you've been following this discussion, there's discussion about how long it will take. And Nicole's talked about this in her content, that this is going to take longer than people think, even though they're trying to fast track it. So that's just one piece of it, the timeline. But also there's a large distrust throughout the general public for what this vaccine will actually be and what it will actually do. There are a lot of people who are saying, I'm not going to take it when it comes out. They're putting chips in there. They're doing this, they're doing that. It's just another way of population control, or so on, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what your immune system does. And I'm not an immunologist. My backgrounds are pharmacology and toxicology. But you're dealing with your body's ability to fight off foreign invaders and contagions. And so just briefly, humans have three types of immunity. Innate immunity. Everyone is born with innate or natural immunity, which is a type of general protection. For example, the skin acts as a barrier to block germs from entering the body. And the immune system recognizes when certain invaders are foreign and could be dangerous. There's also adaptive immunity, or active immunity, which develops throughout our lives. We develop adaptive immunity when we're exposed to diseases or when we're immunized against them with vaccines. And passive immunity, which is borrowed from another source, and it lasts for a short time. For example, antibodies in a mother's breast milk give a baby temporary immunity to diseases the mother has been exposed to. Regarding adaptive immunity, as I was reading that, and this, I'm going to leave this link in the description box below. As I was reading that, I was thinking back. I had a flashback to my childhood of going to get an immunization at the hospital. And I remember the nurse entering the room with me and my mother. I remember clutching my mother because I knew this nurse was going to try to prick me with something. I couldn't have been more than 7 years old. I might have been 4 or 5, but I was afraid of getting pricked. And now, as an adult, I just kind of look away when I'm going to get stuck with a needle. But this article, I'm going to read this article as expediently as I can because I have some other things to research for tonight. And I'm going to read something from the FDA regarding their vaccine product approval process, which after this. So let's see if I can get through this in a very expeditious way, as Joe Clark said in Lean On Me. A vaccine would be the ultimate weapon against the coronavirus and the best route back to normal life. Officials like Dr. Anthony S. Fauci, the top infectious disease expert on the Trump administration's coronavirus task force, estimate a vaccine could arrive in at least 12 to 18 months. And this article has a number of timelines. So it shows you what all the pieces that involve in the research of a vaccine, and then the actual production and approval and distribution. So in some instances, this could take, or should I say in normal instances, this can take as long as 10 years But right now, the effort is to condense it down into 1 to 2. Okay. The grim truth behind this rosy forecast is that a vaccine probably won't arrive anytime soon. And I've heard Nicole say that in her discussions. Clinical trials almost never succeed. We've never released a coronavirus vaccine for humans before. Our record for developing an entirely new vaccine is at least 4 years, more time than the public or the economy can tolerate social distancing orders. But if there was any time to fast track a vaccine, it is now. So Time's Opinion asked vaccine experts how we could condense the timeline and get a vaccine in the next few months instead of years. Here's how we might achieve the impossible. Normally, researchers need years to secure funding, get approvals, and study results piece by piece, but these are not normal times. There are already at least 254 therapies and 95 vaccines related to COVID-19 being explored. If you want to make that 18-month time frame, one way to do that is put as many horses in the race as you can, said Dr. Peter Hotez, Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at the Baylor College of Medicine. And as I've cited in some of my videos on this channel, there are numerous groups around the world working on this. In Russia, I shot a video on Russia. They're really pushing one through, but I don't know that they're being as meticulous as they could be in terms of their regulatory aspect, which I'm going to talk about at the end of this video. So there's a figure here: companies with vaccine trials underway. So they're working on, excuse me, RNA and DNA vaccines and other types. Some of the companies include Moderna, BioNTech and Pfizer, Inovio Pharmaceuticals, Sinovac, the Wuhan Institute, and Sinopharm, the University of Oxford, Imperial College, and this figure is in the article, the New York Times article. Despite the unprecedented push for a vaccine, researchers caution that less than 10% of drugs that enter clinical trials are ever approved by the Food and Drug Administration. The rest fail in one way or another. They are not effective, don't perform better than existing drugs, or have too many side effects. So there's a figure here in this article that depicts basically the drug development pipeline. You start off with a large number of drugs in phase 1, and then going through to the approval process, it whittles down. And that's a part of the pharmaceutical industry and the drug development process. And there are times when I'm at home and my mother says, "Oh, why do these drugs cost so much? These companies are evil." And I have to explain to her, well, there's a price tag associated with creating these things that companies have to recoup. Fortunately, we already have a head start on the first phase of vaccine development research. The outbreaks of SARS and MERS, which are also caused by coronaviruses, spurred lots of research. SARS and SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, are roughly 80% identical, and both use so-called spike proteins to grab onto a specific receptor found on cells in human lungs, the ACE2 receptor. This helps explain how scientists developed a test for COVID-19 so quickly. There's a cost to moving so quickly, however. The potential COVID-19 vaccines now in the pipeline might be more likely to fail because of the swift march through the research phase, said Robert Van Exen, a cell biologist who has worked in the vaccine industry for decades. He predicts we won't see a vaccine approved until at least 2021 or 2022, and even then, this is very optimistic and of relatively low. And yet, he said, this kind of fast tracking is worth a try. Maybe we will get lucky. The next step in the process is preclinical and preparation work. where a pilot factory is ready to produce enough vaccine for trials. Researchers relying on groundwork from the SARS and the MERS outbreak could theoretically move through planning steps swiftly. Sanofi, a French biopharmaceutical company, expects to begin clinical trials late this year for a COVID-19 vaccine that it repurposed from work on a SARS vaccine. If successful, the vaccine could be ready by late 2021. As a rule, researchers don't begin jabbing people with experimental vaccines until after rigorous safety checks. They test the vaccine first on small batches of people, a few dozens during phase 1, then a few hundred in phase 2, then thousands in phase 3. Months normally pass between phases so that researchers can review the findings and get approvals for subsequent phases. But if we do it the conventional way, there's no way we're going to be reaching that timeline of 18 months, said Akiko Awasaki, a professor of immunobiology at the Yale University School of Medicine and an investigator at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. There are ways to slash time off this process by combining several phases and testing vaccines on more people without as much waiting. Last week, the National Academy of Sciences showed an overlapping timeline, describing it as moving at pandemic speed, quote unquote. It's here that talk of fast tracking the timeline meets the messiness of real life. What if a promising vaccine actually makes it easier to catch the virus or makes the disease worse after someone's infected? That's been the case for a few HIV drugs and vaccines for dengue fever because of a process called vaccine-induced enhancement, in which the body reacts unexpectedly and makes the disease more dangerous. Researchers can't easily infect vaccinated participants with the coronavirus to see how the body behaves. They normally wait until some volunteers contract the disease naturally. They contract the virus naturally. That means dosing people in regions hit hardest by the virus like New York, or vaccinating family members of an infected person to see if they get the virus next. If the pandemic subsides, this step could be slowed. That's why vaccines take much longer. That's why vaccines take such a long time, said Dr. Awasaki. But we're making everything very short. Hopefully we can evaluate these risks as they occur as soon as possible. This is where the vaccine timelines start to diverge depending on who you are and where some people might get left behind. If a vaccine proves successful in early trials, regulators could issue an emergency use provision so that doctors, nurses, and other essential workers could get vaccinated right away, even before the end of the year. Researchers at Oxford announced this week that their coronavirus vaccine could be ready for emergency use by September if trials prove successful. So researchers might produce a viable vaccine in just 12 to 18 months, but that doesn't mean you're going to get it. Millions of people could be in line before you, and that's only if the United States finds a vaccine first. If another country like China beats us to it, we could wait even longer while it doses its citizens first. You might be glad of that, though, if it turned out that the fast-tracked vaccine caused unexpected problems. Only after hundreds or thousands are vaccinated would researchers be able to see if a fast-tracked vaccine led to problems like vaccine-induced enhancement. It's true that any new technology comes with a learning curve, said Dr. Paul Offit, the director of the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And sometimes that learning curve has a human price. Once we have a working vaccine in hand, companies will need to start producing millions, perhaps billions of doses, in addition to millions of vaccine doses that are already made each year for mumps, measles, and other illnesses. It's an undertaking almost unimaginable in scope. Companies normally build new facilities perfectly tailored to any given vaccine because each vaccine requires different equipment. Some flu vaccines are produced using chicken eggs, using large facilities where a version of the virus is incubated and harvested. Other vaccines require vats in which a virus is cultured in a broth of animal cells and later inactivated and purified. These factories follow strict guidelines governing biological facilities and usually take around 5 years to build, costing at least 3 times more than conventional pharmaceutical factories. Manufacturers may be able to speed this up by creating or repurposing existing facilities in the middle of clinical trials long before the vaccine in question receives FDA approval. They just can't wait, said Dr. Iwasaki. If it turns out to be a terrible vaccine, they won't distribute it, but at least they'll have the capability to do so if the vaccine is successful. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation says it will build factories for 7 different vaccines, even though we'll end up picking at most 2 of them. We're going to fund the factories for all 7, so that we don't waste time, Bill Gates said during an appearance on The Daily Show. In the end, the United States will have the capacity to mass produce only 2 or 3 vaccines, said Vijay Samant, the former head of vaccine manufacturing at Merck. The manufacturing task is insurmountable, Mr. Samant said. I get sleepless nights thinking about it. Consider just one seemingly simple step, putting the vaccine into vials. Manufacturers need to procure billions of vials and billions of stoppers to seal them. Sophisticated machines are needed to fill them precisely, and each vial is inspected on a high-speed line. Then vials are stored, shipped, and released to the public using a chain of temperature-controlled facilities and trucks. At each of these stages, producers are already stretched to meet existing demands, Mr. Samant said. It's a bottleneck similar to the one that caused a dearth of ventilators, masks, and other personal protective equipment just as COVID-19 surged across America. If you talk about vaccines long enough, a new type of vaccine called messenger RNA, or mRNA for short, inevitably comes up. There are hopes it could be manufactured at a record clip. Mr. Gates even included it on his Time magazine list of 6 innovations that could change the world. Is it the miracle we're waiting for? Rather than injecting subjects with disease-specific antigens to stimulate antibody production, mRNA vaccines give the body instructions to create those antigens itself, because mRNA vaccines don't need to be cultured in large quantities and then purified. They are much faster to produce. They could change the course of the fight against COVID-19. On the other hand, said Dr. Van Exen, no one has ever made an RNA vaccine for humans. Researchers conducting dozens of trials hope to change that, including one by the pharmaceutical company Moderna, backed by investor capital and spurred by federal funding of up to $483 million to tackle COVID-19. Moderna has already fast-tracked an mRNA vaccine. It's entering phase 1 trials this year, and the company says it could have a vaccine ready for frontline workers later this year. Could it work? Yeah, it could work, said Dr. Fred Ledley, a professor of natural biology and applied sciences at Bentley University. But in terms of probability of success, what our data says is that there's a lower chance of approval and the trials take longer. The technology is decades old, yet mRNA is not very stable and can break down inside the body. I did experience that during my postdoc when I did a number of real-time PCR experiments. When you homogenize cells, there are lots of RNases floating around, so you have to use RNase inhibitors to be able, in order to stabilize your RNA samples to create the DNA you need for your real-time PCR experiments. At this point, I'm hoping for anything to work, said Dr. Iwasaki. If it does work, wonderful, that's great. We just don't know. The fixation on mRNA shows the allure of new and untested treatments during a medical crisis. Faced with the unsatisfying reality that our standard arsenal takes years to progress, the mRNA vaccine offers an enticing story mixed with hope and a hint of mystery, but it's riskier than other established approaches. By the way, I've heard Nicole talk about this on her channel as well, the whole idea of mRNA vaccines and why those are problematic and why those will be hard to bring to market. Imagine that the fateful day arrives. Scientists have created a successful vaccine. They've manufactured huge quantities of it. People are dying. The economy is crumbling. It's time to start injecting people. But first, the federal government wants to take a peek. Here goes the regulatory aspect. That might seem like a bureaucratic nightmare, a rubber stamp that could cost lives. There's even a common gripe among researchers. For every scientist employed by FDA, there are 3 lawyers. That's indeed true, and all they care about is liability. Yet FDA approvals are no mere formality. Approvals typically take a full year, during which time scientists and advisory committees review the studies to make sure that the vaccine is as safe and effective as drug makers say it is. While some steps in the vaccine timeline can be fast-tracked or skipped entirely, approvals aren't one of them. There are horror stories from the past where vaccines were not properly tested. In the 1950s, for example, a poorly produced batch of the polio vaccine was approved in a few hours. It contained a version of the virus that wasn't quite dead. So patients who got it actually contracted polio. Several children died. The same scenario playing out today could be devastating for COVID-19, with the anti-vaccination movement and online conspiracy theorists eager to disrupt the public health response. So while the FDA might do this as fast as possible, expect months to pass before any vaccine gets a green light for mass public use. At this point, you might be asking, why are all the research teams announcing such optimistic forecasts when so many experts are skeptical about even an 18-month timeline? Perhaps because it's not just the public listening, it's investors too. These biotechs are putting out all these press announcements, said Dr. Hotez. You just need to recognize they're writing this for their shareholders, not for the purposes of public health. If COVID-19 lives in the shadow of the most vexing virus we've ever faced, HIV, after nearly 40 years of work, here is what we have to show for our vaccine efforts. A few phase 3 clinical trials, one of which actually made the disease worse, and another with a success rate of just 30%. Researchers say they don't expect a successful HIV vaccine until 2030 or later, putting the timeline at around 50 years. That's unlikely to be the case for COVID-19 because, as opposed to HIV, it doesn't appear to mutate significantly. I think we're going to talk about that later on tonight. and exists within a family of familiar respiratory viruses. Even still, any delay will be difficult to bear. But the history of HIV offers a glimmer of hope for how life could continue even without a vaccine. Researchers developed a litany of antiviral drugs that lowered the death rate and improved health outcomes for people living with AIDS. Today's drugs can lower the viral load in an HIV positive person so the virus can't be transmitted through sex. Therapeutic drugs rather than vaccines might likewise change the fight against COVID-19. The World Health Organization began a global search for drugs to treat COVID-19 patients in March. If successful, those drugs could lower the number of hospital admissions and help people recover faster from home while narrowing the infection window so fewer people catch the virus. Combine that with rigorous testing and contact tracing, where infected patients are identified and their recent contacts notified and quarantined, and the future starts looking a little brighter. So far, the United States is conducting fewer than half the number of tests required, and we need to recruit more than 300,000 contact tracers. But other countries have started reopening following exactly these steps. If all these things come together, life might return to normal long before a vaccine is ready to shoot in your arm. So this article is about 5 to 6 months old, but it talks about all the aspects of creating a vaccine. And wow, this is 32 minutes long. So I'm going to stop this video here. This went longer than I wanted it to. I'm going to leave the U.S. FDA's vaccine product approval process in the description box below in case anyone wants to read it. But it contains aspects of what was in that article. And if you've read this article or if you've heard about this before, again, this was in part from my own knowledge. Nicole might have covered this on her channel, but I'm going to stop this here. Please let me know what you think in the comment section below. Please like this video, please share it, and please subscribe to my channel. And if you're not doing anything later on around 6 o'clock Eastern time, please stop through our live stream. And also, as always, remember that your attitude determines your altitude. Take care, and I'll talk to you the next time. Bye-bye.